So I just wanted to make a video talking about relationships, because if everything in the world is a projection of the ego, then all of our relationships also are a projection of ego, and our relationships really ultimately we use to keep ourselves hidden from ourselves. So if you look at what the world would call the most healthy relationships, so say like a husband and a wife that have been together for decades, have kids, do all that stuff, never really appear, at least, to have too many problems on the surface level at least, but really what that is an unconscious agreement that the couple have made with each other, that they're going to keep themselves deceived, they're going to keep themselves hidden from themselves. And that's why the appearance, I guess, of stability is because they've made that agreement that they don't want to look at themselves, they don't want to change, they're just going to stay in this kind of a holding pattern, I guess, because they really don't want to look at themselves, and they don't want to change. They don't want to realize and remember the love that they are inside. And so the ego comes up with these relationships and fools you into thinking, you've found love, but obviously you're still looking externally from yourself, and you're placing that love outside of yourself. And then what happens is most people get stuck in that loop. But if you then look at what the world would call a toxic relationship, or a relationship with a lot of problems, you could actually say that that's a relationship where the couple have unconsciously made an agreement that they do want to find the love that they are. And obviously the way that we find that love that we are is by looking at all of our unconscious unworthiness, guilt, shame, fear, all that stuff. And in order to find that, you need somebody to mirror it back to you so that you can see it and you can finally heal from it. And that's where a lot of those, what the world would call unhealthy relationships, come in, because that really is one way, at least, how you can find all of that stuff. So I think the point that I'm really trying to get to in this video is that the ego comes up with all of these stories and labels and distinctions to try and keep ourselves separate from the love that we are, and to keep us projecting everything externally. So if we do find ourselves in a relationship that doesn't appear healthy on the surface, what we tend to do is we tend to try and find anything that we can to put all that blame onto the other person. So the ego's come up with countless labels and distinctions, whether it's narcissists and empaths, fearful avoidants, dismissive avoidant, BPD, the list goes on and on and on. But if we're really honest with ourselves, we see that we're all narcissists because we're all deceiving ourselves. We're all lying and manipulating ourselves into believing that we separated from love. Our own ego is the narcissist. And we're also all fearful avoidants, because every time that we get really, really close to that, finding that love inside of us and that inner peace, that inner happiness, we run away from it and we retreat. And that's our fear that causes us to do that. And we all do all of these things, but instead of realizing that we have this inner unworthiness, fear, and that we're deceiving ourselves, we come up with all of these labels that we can place on others, and we can say, oh, look, see, it's them, they're the problem, and we can place all the blame on them. But all that does is keep ourselves trapped in the ego, and it keeps ourselves from from uncovering and finding the love that we really are. So yeah, I think if you really want to find yourself and the love that you are, and if you really want to find that inner peace and the inner happiness, then, and this is really hard to do, obviously, because we've spent a lifetime externalizing everything and blaming everything but ourselves. But the time is to really just take that responsibility onto yourself for everything in the world, and to really kind of uncover your own sense of guilt, unworthiness, shame. And that's done at first by forgiving other people, because this isn't easy and it's not a quick process either. But you do it at first by learning to forgive others, and then over time you start to be able to see that it is yourself that's been doing it, and it is yourself that's been projecting everything out from your own mind, everything that we see, our bodies and all that stuff. And then you start forgiving yourself, because you can't just, it's not just a matter of overnight just saying, oh, I'm love and everything's an illusion. Because you really have to go in there and undo all of your own manipulations and all of your own deception, and undo all of that stuff until you eventually get to that sort of core belief that you're separated from God. And then you can kind of feel all of that guilt and shame and unworthiness from that. And that's a very difficult thing to do, and it's a very difficult process. But once you actually do it, the funny thing is that you realize that there was never any need to feel any of that, because we never separated from love. And then you can kind of look back and laugh at yourself and think, oh my God, like what the hell was I thinking? Because like the reality is we weren't in our right minds ever in this world. That's the whole reason for the world and the whole reason that we were here. We weren't in our right minds. We thought we were separate from God. We thought we were these little egos, these little bodies. It's really quite crazy. So yeah, wherever you're at now, I don't know where you are personally along your path, but if you can learn to just take responsibility for everything that's happening in your life, all the problems, whether it's problems in relationships, whether it's problems with health, whether it's problems financially, because every problem, or perceived problem I should say, every problem really comes from the same place, which is a lack of love. And fullness can only ever come by being completely honest with yourself, and not hiding anything from yourself, because that's what love is, really, isn't it? Like love's never judged you. Love's never made you feel less than perfect, because love knows it's perfect. It's only the ego that does any of these things. And so the only way to really be free of the ego is by doing what the ego doesn't want to do, which is look at itself. Look at the fact that it's completely deceived us. And that takes like complete self-honesty, and it takes complete responsibility, because the ego wants to keep you looking outside of yourself, blaming others and thinking of yourself as a separate identity. Whereas love knows itself that everything is love. Nothing is separate from love. So the only way to really come back to that love is to always remember that. And we're obviously all going to have times where we forget, but the trick is to just continuously remind yourself and keep coming back to that love until you reach that final place in your mind where you initially made that decision to separate from love out of unconscious fear. And once you can kind of approach that unconscious gap and cross it, That's when you've accepted the atonement, or I hate the word enlightenment, but reached enlightenment. Or really, you've just found the love that you are, and you're no longer being ruled by the ego. And that's where peace really happens. And it's not that like the ego really just ever fully disappears, because once you reach that place, you still have an ego. Of course you do, like you're in the world, but you notice it and you laugh at it. You just find it funny. It's ridiculous because it's so insane. It really is funny. And so yeah, you just laugh, and there's no longer any judgment, there's no longer any guilt, there's no longer any shame. You just be in the world, and you're at peace, because why wouldn't you be? You know yourself as love.